All right, so it's 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining this very special webinar. Today we have our lady of the hour, Mrs. Ndidi Nwuneli, who will be speaking with us, sharing some knowledge and her experiences in the business of food and agriculture, telling us about different opportunities and insights she's gathered along the way. My name is Olamide Majakudumi. I'm the country manager for Nexford. As you all, maybe many of you already know over the line, Nexford is 100% licensed and accredited American university. We're here to empower and enable economic mobility around the world by providing learners to high quality, affordable education that prepares them for the global workplace. We're on the mission to be the largest, most affordable American university in the world, and supporting our learners to be able to face the world with job ready and future focused skills. So before I hand over to Mrs. Nwuneli, who will be taking us through a really exciting presentation, I would love to share a little bit about who our speaker is today. And even before I do that, I'd really love to thank you again, Mrs. Ndidi, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and I know it's no easy task getting on your calendar, so thank you for taking the time out today. So moving on with Mrs. Ndidi's bio. Ndidi Nwuneli is the Managing Director of Sahel Consulting, which works across West Africa, unlocking the agriculture and nutrition potential in the region. She's also the co-founder of AACE Foods, which was established in 2009 to fight malnutrition, reduce post-harvest losses among smallholder farmers and displaced imports. She's the founder of Leap Africa, which inspires, empowers, and equips a new cadre of principled, disciplined, and dynamic young leaders in Africa. Ndidi started her career as a management consultant with McKinsey & Company, working in their Chicago, New York, and Johannesburg offices. She holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and an undergraduate degree with honors from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. She was a senior fellow at the Mozava Ramani Center for Business and Government at the Harvard Kennedy School and an Aspen Institute New Voices Fellow. Ndidi was recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum and received a national honor from the Nigerian government. Ndidi serves on the board of the Rockefeller Foundation, AGRA, Nigerian Breweries, Godrej Consumer Products, India Fairfax, Africa Holdings Canada, Business Day newspaper, Royal DSM Sustainability Boards, and I'm sure the list goes on. Ndidi is the author of Social Innovation in Africa, a practical guide, for scaling impact, which was published by Routledge. She is a TED Global speaker, and her work has been featured on CNN, BBC, and a range of international and local media outlets. Ndidi, thank you again so much for being here with us today, and we look forward to hearing from you. So with that, I'll hand over.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and I'm always honored to speak, and I love supporting young people, so thank you for the opportunity. I've chosen to speak on agribusinesses and leveraging opportunities within Africa, and I'll rush through my presentations. Usually a presentation I give in an hour. I'll do it in 15 to 20 minutes so that we can have enough time for questions. And the presentation will really, sorry, for some reason it's not moving. So let's understand what's going on. Okay. So the presentation will really go through my personal experiences in agriculture and food, lessons for this sector, and opportunities for you to consider. So basically, why I entered agriculture, I didn't study it. I had my first and second degree in business, as you heard, but there was something that disturbed me wherever I went in this world, and that was the connection between Africa and food. Most people would look at Africa and look at me as an African, and they would tell me about how they were starving children in Africa and how their parents used to tell them to eat their dinner because they were starving children in Africa. This connection between Africa and food really disturbed me primarily because Africa is naturally endowed for agricultural excellence. 50 to 70% of our population works in agriculture. 80% of the food produced is produced by smallholder farmers. We have 60% of the world's arable land. We're the leading producer of chocolate. 70% of cocoa comes from Africa. Cashews, plantain, yam, cassava, the list goes on. And when you think about the potential in this sector, it makes you weep that we're net importers of food. And when you think about the size of our continent and the available land, when you put in the United States and China and Europe, you still have space on the continent. Then you think about all the natural endowments we have in our continent and what we could be offering the world. And then you wonder why enough of us are not engaged in this sector. So I entered this sector full-time in 2008. Prior to this, I had worked in many other sectors because I felt that we could transform the landscape. I started a company called Sahel Consulting, and our mission is to transform Africa's agriculture and nutrition landscape. And our vision is to be recognized as the most trusted consulting partner and point of reference in the African agriculture and nutrition landscape. We provide a range of services, advisory services, agriculture value chain analysis, agribusiness training, policy consulting, and project implementation. And we work with a range of partners. You can see the long list, both multinationals, international development agencies, nonprofits, and private companies. One of our projects, which I'm really proud of, is called the Advancing Local Dairy Development in Nigeria project, which is focused on transforming the dairy sector. Nigeria imports lots of milk, dry milk, in fact, from Europe, when we have the fourth largest cattle herd in Africa. And so the idea is, what can we do to ensure that we can source milk locally and have fresh milk and fresh yogurt and fresh ice cream at our doorstep? So what we're doing is putting farmers into clusters, providing training, linking them up with private companies that need milk, and creating a policy and regulatory environment to support them. We're also doing the same in yam and cassava. And through a sister company called Sahel Capital, we invest in private equity, put private equity funds into companies. We've invested in shea butter, in rice, in palm oil, in dairy again, cassava starch, and a range of other sectors. And just today, we had our Sahel Scholars Conference. We actually used to go to universities to convince students that agriculture is worth pursuing and to facilitate discussions with professors. And now we actually did it virtually today, and we had, about 1,800 sign up, and it was quite an exciting conference. My other hat is that I'm the co-founder of a food company called AACE Foods, and we started this company 10 years ago to really demonstrate that we could source locally and process nutritious and tasty food for our people. And AACE Foods was not always a success story. Now it's considered a success story, but when we started, our first project was going to be jams. Our first product was going to be jams. I love mango jam and papaya jam and agbalumo jam, which is udala in Igbo. And we thought lots of Nigerians would love these jams as well. And just to share that it wasn't an easy start. It took us a year to get this off the ground. And then we found out that the average Nigerian did not want orange jam. They wanted red jam, which was strawberry jam. And we do only grow strawberries in one part of Nigeria. And by the end, we were coloring our jam to make it red when it wasn't really strawberry jam. And the second thing was that, the truth is, we don't produce enough glass in this country, and there's a monopoly of the sugar industry. So basically, we were clear that the raw materials weren't available. There wasn't a market demand for this. And so we quickly pivoted to spices and complementary food. And today we have about 14 products in the market. We do mostly B2B, business and business to business sales. So a lot of the companies that make instant noodles use our spices. Unilever uses our spices to make their own seasonings. And then we have a soya maize that fights moderate malnutrition, beans flour, etc. And then the fourth business that I'm helping incubate is called Nourishing Africa, which is an online home for 1 million entrepreneurs who can unlock this $1 trillion industry. And I created this because every day people call me and say, Ndidi, I want to enter this poultry industry. Give me information. I want to raise money. Give me information. So what we do on Nourishing Africa is we have all the information you need to enter this sector. There's data, access to financing, jobs, events, And we've really shown that there's so much promise in the sector. And we have so many young people who are uploading their business opportunities. So if you're in the ag sector or you know others in the ag sector, please tell them to upload their profiles, because a lot of funders are coming on these profiles, are coming to our hub to look for people. As I mentioned, we have funding opportunities, and then we have a lot of knowledge sharing, free podcasts and webinars and training sessions for entrepreneurs in ag to build their skills. So what have I learned from my work in this sector, and why I've become an evangelist for agriculture? I think what COVID-19 has shown us all over the world is that you can't focus on health alone without thinking about food. In Nigeria, in just the past 6 weeks, food prices in some value chains have increased by 10 to 50%. Already, we're seeing shortages of specific type of food, and this is causing a panic across the entire country and across the continent. In East Africa, this is compounded by the locust crisis, and with devaluation, the currency shocks that we're having, and the oil shocks, we know that people have very limited purchasing power. So their dependency on imported food is going to shrink, because obviously it's going to be too expensive for the average Nigerian. But even before COVID, when I just looked at the math and said, if everybody just spends $1 on food a day, this industry would be 876 billion. If we spent as Africans $10 a day, would have an $8.8 trillion industry. In between this, there's money on the table, and we're leaving this money for others to take. The World Bank and the African Development Bank estimate that this industry by 2030 will be a $1 trillion industry. So everybody listening, think about what slice or what piece of this industry you can take advantage of and you can benefit from. Technology is changing the face of agriculture. It's no longer a hoe and cutlass industry. We're using sensors, we're using bioengineering, mobile applications, automated technology. There's financing opportunities, insurance opportunities, opportunities for training and job placements. And across the board, every single service is needed in this sector. And we're also seeing young people getting excited and getting into the sector. We're seeing young people thinking out of the box about how they can leverage opportunities in this sector. We're seeing opportunities to use insects as feed. And we are in the tropics. One thing we know how to do is grow insects. So there's so many opportunities across the board. But what does it take to position any business for success? It's a tough industry. You can't wake up and grow and make money overnight in the agriculture sector. So one of the key things you're going to have to think through is what problem you're trying to solve, just like in any sector. But in ag in particular, thinking about your business model, thinking about how you're going to attract talent, how you're going to build partnerships, how you're going to develop a compelling brand, how you're going to plan for exits and succession, and how you're going to ensure that your business is investment ready. Now, what does it take to build an agile business model? When I was introduced, it was mentioned that I wrote a book on social innovation in Africa. When I wrote that book, I had 6 key components of business models that succeed. And I'm now working on a second book just focused on agriculture and food called Nourishing Africa. And I've added new components to that. And one of the key components I've added is the ability to adapt to climate change, agility, and resilience to shocks and risks. And the truth is, what COVID-19 has shown is that there's no business model that can survive if it's not resilient to shocks and risks, because there will be more and more shocks and risks in our sector. Another thing we added is this business model, any business model, whether it's in agriculture or any other sector, has to leverage technology and data. Because right now, if you're not leveraging technology, you're going to have an obsolete business model. You have to shape the ecosystem. When you come into a sector, you have to basically say, what are the policies, what are the enabling environments, and what can I do to create an environment that works for me? And your business model has to be cost efficient and dynamic. An example of a very exciting entrepreneur that we interviewed for the book is Nwuneli Pets. This young man started this business basically saying, we have great meat in Africa. I want to sell African meat around the world. And then he realized that we couldn't meet many of the standards that the Europeans had set. So what he did was pivot very quickly, and now he sells pet food in 12 countries. And he sells all sorts of exotic pet food. And what he realized is that people are willing to spend 3 times what they'll spend on themselves, on their pets. And they're excited when you have croc leg bones or jerky or venison bones or bone marrow bones. And he has private label. He partners with Woolworths and pet foods, and he's in 12 countries, as I mentioned, and in some very sophisticated markets. There are also other business models that leverage technology like Cow Tribe in Ghana that uses mobile telephony to ensure that farmers can vaccinate their cattle and their other pets. Twiga, which is working across East Africa, started in Kenya, that's leveraging cell phone technology to link farmers who have fruits with urban retailers. And Twiga has raised, when I interviewed them, they had raised $60 million. I think now they're at $90 million. So there's so much interest in their business model just because they're leveraging technology. By the time an urban retailer orders fruits, within 14 hours, the fruits are delivered fresh from a farm. Beyond the right business model and filling a gap and adding value, you have to have a compelling brand. Food in the food industry, people have to trust you. So your brand has to tell a story, has to inspire trust, has to build credibility. And Hello Tractor is one very interesting example that has built a brand. And he basically calls his business the Uber of tractors. So he sells software to tractor companies. And he's been in Fast Company, the Wall Street Journal, really building a brand around tractors. There's other examples like Java Foods in Zambia. So telling your story and building your brand is critical. Then you have to make sure that you're investment ready. And what I found through my research is that there's more money available for entrepreneurs than entrepreneurs can absorb. So financing is not a challenge. There are all sorts of resources available to you. The challenge is, are you investment ready? Do you have strong financial systems and controls? Do you have credibility? Do you have a strong board? Do you have governance systems in place? Do you have a track record? And can you demonstrate a profitable exit for your investors? So many entrepreneurs in this context who have a strong brand and have credibility have money being thrown at them every day. In fact, they have to turn away money. And we have entrepreneurs we call donor darlings, but just because they figured out how to package themselves and how to ensure that their funders have confidence that the funds are safe with them. There are many incubators and accelerators across the continent. And even in Nigeria, we have quite a few that you can take advantage of. And there are many who have exited as well and who have raised significant amounts of money. Beyond raising funding, you have to retain talent. And talent is key. And I'm sure that's why you go to business school and why you're taking advantage of Nexford and other opportunities. You have to hire mission-driven high achievers who are ethical. You have to ensure that you have humble, hungry, and emotionally intelligent team members. You have to leverage volunteers and build an extension system. And then you have to establish key partnerships. In this sector, you cannot thrive without partnerships. And there's so many exciting partnerships across the board. One company I visited in Rwanda, I was just blown away by. It's called Africa Improved Foods. And it basically has funding from CDC, which is a British development agency, FMO, which is Dutch, DSM, another Dutch company, the IFC, and then it partnered with the government of Rwanda, and it produces complementary food and super cereals for the World Food Program and other organizations. I mean, their output is 7 tons per hour, and they're a world-class company right there in Rwanda. And they did this through partnerships, basically bringing together funders, bringing together stakeholders, and saying we need to fill a gap, and how are we going to do it? And they've been able to prove that it's possible to work with multinationals and local agencies to deliver impact on the African continent. And then you have to plan for exits and succession. From the day you start your company in ag and food or in any sector, you have to be thinking about when you're going to exit. Doesn't mean there's a difference between ownership and management. Just because you've started a company doesn't mean you have to run it day to day. We started AACE Foods in 2009, incorporated fully operational 2010, and we go there once a month, if even, because we have a very capable team and a very strong board. Leap Africa, which I founded, I still sit on the board, but I left day-to-day management in 2007. So even in the African continent, if you put systems and structures in place, you can have team members who are reliable and capable, who can work with you to run companies. And this talks about Kenyan entrepreneurs. Sorry, I modified this from the Kenyan stage, but I want to round up by just coming back to what I started with, which is one of my goals is to transform the way we think about food and African food. And I'm so excited about the renaissance with chefs in Nigeria and chefs all over Africa, and GTB Food Fair, and a lot of renaissance around creativity in our food ecosystem. But when you look at where African food is ranked relative to food from other parts of the world, it's so disturbing, because we all know that we have great food on our continent, and yet the rest of the world doesn't. They don't seem to recognize it. In fact, African food was ranked the lowest when they compared food in the United States. And when the number one was Japanese food. And when they asked people why they like Japanese food, they said they like the flavor, it's healthy, etc. Now, the amazing thing is that didn't happen overnight. When I've studied this, Japan actually works systematically to make its food global. Nigeria can do the same. Ethiopia can do the same. Senegal can do the same, where you position your food globally so that it's celebrated. That doesn't only work globally, increasing the demand for your food, but it also works locally, where your youth become proud of their food and celebrate it and invest in it. And I also think, as we think about the cell phone revolution, that this is projected to increase across the continent, which changes the way we do business, how we order food, how we order inputs, how farmers work, how we use GPS technology, how we use the fact that we might not even have to go into farms to do farming because we can use robots. So there's so much available to us as we scale. So as I round up, I want you to consider a few things. First, I want to change your mindset about the potential in agriculture. Over the last few weeks, I've gotten calls from people in the oil sector. They realize that, the days of oil are numbered. We've been saying this for a long time, but agriculture is the new oil and has to replace oil as Africa's #1 investment and Nigeria's #1 investment. We have to change our mindsets about the potential in this sector and the opportunities in this sector. We also have to review our business model and find a sweet spot that we're uniquely qualified to address. We have to leverage resources. There's so many available, especially to young people. NourishingAfrica.com has a plethora of those resources, so please go on. We have to advocate for a level playing field. People often think of Africa as the sink of the world. I'll give a session on this another day, but when we see food in Africa that's imported, don't always think it's better than local food. Most of what we're calling milk in Nigeria doesn't have any protein. It's powder, so you don't know what actually is in it. The same with tomato paste. So there's so much food fraud. And if we source locally and grow locally and hold ourselves to high standards, I think we can actually displace a lot of the imports. We have to shape your ecosystem, and then we have to tell positive stories about the opportunities in this sector. Every opportunity I have, I want young people to change this paradigm, to prove that we can feed it. Africa can feed itself and feed the world. The image of these starving African children should not follow us everywhere we go. We must leave a legacy for our children and grandchildren. We must prove that we're naturally endowed for agricultural excellence and that every African can eat 3 square meals a day, because it only improves our future. If we don't address this, then we'll continue to have a stunted generation, because the first 100 days of a child's life, they need to have nutritious food. And yet 1 out of every 3 Nigerian children is stunted. 1 out of every 3 African children is stunted, and this is unacceptable. So I'll end with my current mantra, which is a quote that a young African said to an African president. The young African said, "This generation is no longer asking God to grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change. We're asking the Almighty to grant us the courage and wisdom to change the things we cannot accept. I cannot accept that in the 21st century, we're net importers of food. I cannot accept that agriculture is relegated to the back burner in many of our countries. I cannot accept that 1 out of every 3 Nigerian child is stunted. And so I would challenge you and ask you to please consider opportunities in the sector for yourself and for those in your life, so that together we can transform this sector and create opportunities for all of us, create jobs for all of us, and ensure that we have a brighter future." Thank you so much.
Ndidi, thank you so much for that rundown. We have questions for you, but it's like you've already started touching on almost everything that we wanted to get into, but we'll definitely look to drill deeper. I'm already seeing questions in the Q&A box. So guys, as your questions come in, please do put them in the question and answer box. We'll try to get everything answered. Ndidi, thanks again for that. We'll start to dig a bit deeper. And guys, as Ndidi is on the line, please ask her a lot of questions. As you can already see, she has a wealth of knowledge and is already telling us about so many different nuggets in the industry. So let's take advantage of her time while we have her with us. I'd also like to add that Ndidi is one of my biggest inspirations, just in terms of how you've been so successful in your portfolio career, as you like to call it. So I'll be asking you a range of different questions stemming from your experience in agriculture and just your own career experience. Generally, for those, a lot of us who are starting out early on in our careers, what can we learn from you as we progress to stay successful? So a few questions here, and this one, is along the lines of some things that you've already started to speak about. I would want to know what you would say are some of the top lucrative opportunities in the agricultural sector, specific to startups. So for those of us who may be looking to start out and don't really have much, what are some lucrative areas that we can look into as a very early beginner?
Okay, thank you. So I think there's so many opportunities, and that's why I said the industry is wide open. When I look at the agricultural landscape, we start with inputs. Inputs are seeds, right? Mostly seeds. Well, let me change my background, sorry. When we think about the opportunities, inputs like seeds are really fantastic for us to consider. And I don't know how many of us have thought about seeds as an opportunity. We currently work on a range of seed system projects at Sahel Consulting, and we've been amazed at how many opportunities there are for seed systems, and how we don't think about seed systems when we normally think about these value chains. The same with fertilizer, the same with crop protection products, that's from inputs. Mechanization is an untapped opportunity because most farmers don't want to buy a tractor. So they want to be able to rent tractors from others. And so how do we leverage mechanization? So that's inputs. Then you move from inputs to primary production. And when I look at primary production, a lot of opportunities in high value crops. What type of crops am I talking about? Avocado is one high value crop. The average price of an avocado in Lagos is between 300 and 500 naira for one avocado. So it's not everything that you say is a high value crop. Another high value crop is cauliflower. And that's becoming very, very popular because of health concerns. So think about high value crops. Think about what you can do in those high value crops and how to enter the high. You don't have to be the one planting it. Agriculture is not just about planting. You can be aggregating, you can be processing. Cauliflower is, people are making it into flour. So you could be the one actually buying the cauliflower, drying it and making it into flour. So think about what along the value chain you can focus on. Beyond primary production and processing, there's a lot of opportunity. There are lots of opportunities in training in agriculture, in recruiting staff for agriculture, in providing finance and insurance in agriculture. So I would say, for me, what I tell young people is, what is your passion? What makes you angry? What gives you joy? And if you figure it out, then you zero in on it. So don't say because Ndidi said cauliflower powder, I'm going to go into cauliflower powder. No, that might not be well suited for you. You have to look internally and do a skills audit and understand yourself, and then figure out where you're best suited to spend your time and what problem you're best suited to solve. Because when I entered this sector, I knew, for example, that I couldn't do anything in logistics. It drives me nuts. Sitting in traffic drives me nuts. So imagine me managing one driver drives me nuts, not to talk about managing 100 drivers. So logistics was not an area, but there's a need in logistics. It's cheaper to bring a container from London to Nigeria than it is to get a truck of tomatoes from Plateau States to Lagos. Now, if you're someone who can solve this logistics problem, everybody will love you, because all of us need to get our products into ShopRite. ShopRite is one organization that doesn't have a central distribution warehouse. So you have to take it to their 16 locations across Nigeria yourself as an SME. So if there's a logistics provider that can take up that task from us, oh my gosh, that's a huge opportunity. Or is it providing merchandisers? So I could go on and on, but what I'm saying is you do your skills audit, figure out what your skills are, your experiences are, what you're passionate about, and then marry them together and say, where in this sector can I add the most value? Don't be swayed by what others are doing, because that might not be your calling. And I use logistics as an example to say it's easier for me to do product development and processing than it is for me to take on logistics. So you have to figure out what your sweet spot is, and then determine who your customer is, because you can do business to business, business to government, and business to consumer. And ACE Foods, 90% of our business today is business to business, because we needed to build volumes. We couldn't start off doing business to consumer because we didn't have the funding for large marketing spends. So we do a lot of sales in 25 kg sacks to fast food companies and to institutional buyers, because that was an entry strategy for us. So you have to also figure out who your customer is and what entry strategy you can leverage to galvanize the market.
Very interesting. Indeed, it's funny that you mentioned the seeding system. So during this period of lockdown, my mom has actually started planting in her backyard. And so the other day she was telling me that, they planted ewedu and they actually ate it already. They're already seeing, they're bearing the fruits. They planted sugarcane, lemons, all sorts of different fruits. And so it's interesting that, I was kind of blown away that it was so easy to, for that to happen. So, like you said, we can start from, from almost anywhere, even as we're looking at different systems like the seeding one. So another question for you. We know that, Nigeria's export income, 90% of it comes from oil. And, it takes very difficult times like these for us to really realize how hard-hitting that can be for our economy. So looking on the, sort of like the macroeconomics of things, what would you say are the low-hanging fruit areas for the economy in order to diversify, which we've been saying we're going to do with agriculture for some time now?
Okay, so I think that there are quite a few low-hanging fruits. I want to start off with this period, COVID-19, and where I see a lot of opportunity. Number one is around data. If there are organizations and individuals who know how to get data on supply and demand of food right now, there's a huge opportunity, not just in our cities, but across the country. And that data is valuable because we actually don't know where, India can say we have 6 months of grains. Everybody, don't worry, we're not going to have a food shortage. Nobody in Nigeria can tell me how many months of grains we have, how many months of rice we have. And that is creating what we call a panic, and it's creating hoarding and price hikes. So data is low-hanging fruit. It's not easy to get high-quality data, but if you can get data on market data, on supply data, on where the vulnerable people are right now in Nigeria, because so many of us have these feeding programs. ACE Foods is feeding people across the country. We're giving donations. So many organizations are doing so. Are we getting to the poorest of the poor? Are we getting to the most vulnerable? We don't know. So data for me is low-hanging fruit. The second is, and somebody mentioned it here, is processing. Post-harvest losses are very high. One of the reasons I got attracted to this sector is because 40 to 60% of our fruits and vegetables go to waste in Nigeria. 20 to 30% of our grains and tubers go to waste. We have such a high rate of waste. In Europe, they're talking about food waste, but they're talking about food waste when it comes to people putting so much on their plate and having to throw it out, or restaurants having to throw out food. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about food waste because of how we harvest, how we store, how we package. We're still using baskets for tomatoes. For those of you who have ever bought a basket of tomato, what do you see when you get into the middle of the basket? You see rotten tomatoes, because tomatoes should never be placed on each other. The same with yam. We put yam on top of each other. By the time the yam comes from Benue State to Lagos, many of the yam tubers are already spoiled because of the heat, because of the truck and the movement, the friction. So the truth is we need a lot more processing. We need on-farm processing. We need better storage. We need cold storage. We need to transition from the way we've been harvesting and storing to more advanced technology, and it's available to us. And then we need value addition. I always ask Nigerians, how many ways can you make rice? And they tell me jollof rice and fried rice, and I start laughing. If you go to Asia, you have rice paper, you have rice wine, rice flour. I mean, honestly, we haven't even started thinking through for everything we've been blessed with, what are the 10 uses of each of these items? What are the 20 uses? And how can we package and process in an innovative and a creative way so that people abroad and even locally can really value what we have to offer? I think there's such a need for processing and value addition and innovation in the way that we eat, or the way that we utilize food. It blows my mind that we have sweet corn in cans from Asia when we have corn 4 months out of the year, after which we don't have corn anymore. And that's crazy. So for me, I think that's a huge opportunity, post-harvest loss management and value addition. And then if I had to pick a third area, I would say it's talent for the sector. So this morning we had the Sahel Scholars program. And then in the afternoon, we just finished a conference, our first conference with educators and researchers. Every SME in this sector is looking for staff. I'm desperately looking for good staff. And that's a huge opportunity. And our universities are not preparing these students. They're not preparing them for excellence in this sector. And we're having to bring in expatriates for many of our portfolio companies to be specialists in this sector. So if you can train people for this sector, please do so. I think I'll challenge your university to take this on as well. We need talent for the ag sector. We're willing to pay for talent in this sector. And there's so much expertise that we can learn from the US and other places, which we have to leverage in this space. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ndidi, for that charge. Absolutely. There's so many different areas that we're looking to, pan the scope of business to, like agriculture, health, all the different key areas that, we really need certain expertise locally here. So absolutely. Thanks for that. I want to just pivot slightly and talk a little bit about your career. And then we'll take questions from the audience after this. So obviously you've been very successful in your career. You started off with doing consulting, you have an MBA yourself, you've gone into education, into foods and agriculture. How did you handle career switching in a sense? How did you make sure when you were going into a different field that you had the right tools, the right knowledge, and the right skills to be successful?
Well, I am a big believer in lifelong learning, and I always have time for people who are in education, because I think we can't get enough education. So having a strong educational foundation is critical, but you have to commit to a couple of things. Number one is reading. I read widely. Now I don't read novels, but I read articles, papers, publications. So read widely, always read. The second is you have to develop an expertise in something. And I started by saying things, I've been motivated by what makes me angry. So in 2002, I started both Leap Africa and NIA. And at that time, I was really angry about this concept of leadership. We were told that we were leaders of tomorrow. How many of you heard that when you were growing up? You're a leader of tomorrow. And then I looked at the people who were telling us, they told us in the 70s we're leaders of tomorrow. They told us in the 80s, they told us in the 90s. The same people were telling us in the 90s that we're leaders of tomorrow. And they started leading when they ruling when they were 27, 25, and now they're in their 70s and they still don't want to leave office. And I realized that many of us felt paralyzed about what we could do. So I started Leap Africa. Leap stands for Leadership, Effectiveness, Accountability, and Professionalism. At that time, to change mindsets of young people, that they could be leaders of today and tomorrow. Today and tomorrow. That when you're young, you have skills, you're willing to take risks, you're passionate, you have time. And this is the best time to lead, is when you're young. And leadership is an act, not a position. That the people who are telling us we're rulers, not leaders. And so that was my passion. And I worked on this. And how did I build the skills? I didn't study leadership. So I said, okay, let me take some classes. This is something I need to understand. And at that time, I couldn't pay for any of these courses. So I went to a leadership organization. I said, I can do your strategic plan. I know how to do strategic plans if I can take this leadership course for free. So it was like trade by barter. And the interesting thing is they said, come and do the leadership course. In the end, I didn't do the strategic plan for them. They said, don't worry, go and do what you want to do. I also started asking organizations if I could volunteer with them so that I could build skills. And they were like, sure, come and volunteer. And that's how I started getting confidence that I could design a curriculum for leadership. And over time, I contacted organizations all over the world who were doing exactly what I wanted to do. They shared their knowledge with me. I perfected it. And we did our first course, then we did our second, and each time it got better and better and better. So after some time in 2000, so I started LEAP in 2002, and in 2007, I stepped out of day-to-day management. And what happened was that it was a personal problem. My husband got shot, and he needed to have surgery, and he said he wants a change of scenery. So we moved into Senegal, and it was in Senegal that I actually restarted working in agriculture. It was the height of the food crisis, and I was alarmed. I started seeing hunger everywhere I went. And so the same thing, I had not studied agriculture, but I started reading, started volunteering, started consulting, and started building my expertise. And 12 years down the road, I mean, I've considered, should I get a PhD in agriculture? Every dean of every agriculture school I talk to says, why do you want a PhD? Ndidi, you know more than many of the professors. And how did I build that knowledge? I mean, the deans of these schools are in Oxford and Cambridge, and they're not small schools. And how did I build this knowledge? By doing. They're doing, getting my hands dirty. And it takes a lot of humility, right, to start again. And you'd say, oh, you went to Harvard Business School. Man, I've lost shoes in mile 12. You know, nowadays I don't have to go out to the field. I have a lot of staff who go to the field. But in the beginning, I went out to the field myself. So you can't fool me about what's going on in the market because I understand the market. And so being able to humble yourself and stand, you know, in front of a supermarket and ask them to pay you for the spices they finished selling. You know, that humility is important because to be a lifelong learner, you have to admit that you have a lot to learn. So each time it's been a difficult reinvention process, but each time it's been God asking me to take on new things, and I've had to develop expertise. So why am I writing a book right now on how Africa can feed itself and the world? Because globally, other people are shaping the future of African agriculture. I still go to conferences where I'm the only African around the table talking about African agriculture, and I can't understand it. And I realized that if I write a book, since I'm not getting a PhD, that I can be recognized as an expert. And so to write this book, I've had to interview entrepreneurs all over the continent. I've had to interview policymakers. And so I'm not just talking about my experience, I'm talking about our experience. That gives me a lot more credibility to be able to speak. And I've also started writing a lot of articles and op-eds. And I'll just end by saying this COVID-19, when it first started, even before the lockdown, I just said, I couldn't sleep the whole weekend. COVID-19. I said, hunger is going to kill more people than COVID-19 if we don't get these lockdowns right. So I wrote this article ensuring that hunger doesn't kill more people than COVID-19. And I sent that article everywhere because when they were designing the lockdown strategy, they did not remember food and agriculture. So the Governors Forum asked me to help write the section on how to make sure that food continues to flow. And that article was now a reference point in other parts of the world where people were sharing it. And I was so happy that God led me to say, write something, get your voice out there. So I think all of us have that power to write. You can write and post it on LinkedIn. You can write and post it on Medium. You can even write and put it on any forum to start shaping public policy and start having a voice. And so that's my encouragement to all of you, is that if you feel passionate enough about something, there's so many ways that you can influence what's going on in your ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Ndidi. I have so many questions, and I can keep going on and on, but it looks like we have quite a few questions rolling in from the audience. So if we can go ahead and start taking these. Do you have the Q&A box open?
Yes, and there's so many. I'm just overwhelmed, and I've had a very long day, so I'm not going to be able to type responses into any of them.
Some of these,
but I'll take them. I'll take the ones I can.
Okay.
Okay, so the first thing I would say is for a lot of you, please go on nourishingafrica.com. Please. The reason I started that digital company is because I really believe many of us don't have the tools, the skills, and the information. And on that website, you'll find lots of data, funding sources, and everything you want. So please go on nourishingafrica.com. In terms of partnering with Sahel Consulting, I've also put in the link to our website, www.sahelconsults.com. We also have a lot of quarterly publications, research, and information for you. So please, please go on. In terms of specific questions, I'm trying to find them. Maybe you can read them out if I can't seem to see them.
The questions?
Yes.
Okay. There's a few people who are asking about the presentation. We'll have the recording sent out to everyone who registered for this afterwards. And so that answers that. There's a few others here. Someone asking about how to transition successfully into the agricultural sector. So I already talked a little bit about career switching, but do you have anything more to add to that?
Yes, I think it depends on whether you want to be an entrepreneur or whether you want to be an employee. On the Nourishing Africa portal, we actually have a jobs portal. So if you're looking for a job, please go on there and search for the job that you're looking for. We are also hiring, so for both the Abuja and Lagos office, and we have team members in Kano, Kaduna, Plateau, Jigawa. So Sahel itself is hiring, and many of our partner organizations are hiring, so please send your resume. If you want to start a business, I highly recommend that you write down your concept and your idea, and then go to Nourishing Africa and then search for accelerators. There's lots of accelerators and incubators. There's the Lagos Angels Network. The CC Hub, depending on the type of company you want to start, Fate Foundation, Leap Africa has a social innovators program. So there are lots of resources in Nigeria to help you if you want to start a business. We are also going to be starting a grants program soon in nourishingafrica.com to give grants, but it wouldn't be to startups, unfortunately. That's why I recommend you try CC Hub, Fate Foundation, even Lagos Business School and EDC, Enterprise Development Center, because they also have a lot of startup support for those who want to start businesses.
Someone asked that you talked about eliminating food waste. Most of the food grown in northern Nigeria are perishable. How do we eliminate unsold tomatoes, avocado, etc.?
So I had mentioned that there's a big need for data. And one of the things we need to know is, there are lots of people starting digital websites now to connect, to say if you want to buy tomatoes, we can buy from you, mile12.com and things like that. But I think we don't have the data that says in Kano, there are these 4 farmers who have tomatoes, if you need them in Lagos in bulk. So I think we need a lot more online portals that are connecting farmers to markets, not connecting aggregators to markets. So please, if you have that ability, please create that opportunity for us. In terms of other ways, I think we need innovation around drying technology. A lot of tomato is dried in the north. For those of you who have been to the north, you'll see, as you're going from village to village, you're going to see lots of tomato on the floor being dried. And the challenge with drying on the floor is that it exposes the produce to lots of bacterial infections, dung from cows and goats and chickens. And the microbial load is just too high, and it's really not safe for human consumption, even though we do eat the dried tomatoes and we do eat the dried corn. So the challenge for us is, what technology can we use? Solar technology that's affordable for farmers. Can we create clusters of farmers so they can share the cost of this solar technology to dry in an enclosed space? I think there's so much opportunity for that. So if you're an engineer, if you're a fabricator, if you're an innovator, think about low-cost approaches and think about how we can adapt technology from other parts of the world for low-cost interventions to avert post-harvest losses. And then again, like I talked about, processing. AACE Foods has a range of spices and complementary food. And we started doing spices, the same reason. So much of our pepper goes to waste because we still buy a lot of fresh pepper. So much of our ginger and garlic goes to waste. So what we do is really dried spices, which are available all year round and are extremely potent. We're doing onions now. We have onion powder and onion flakes. A lot of onions go to waste. So we need to see a lot more of that technology being leveraged for all our value chains.
There's a couple questions actually about animal farming, especially poultry. Poultry farming. What can you tell anyone who's looking to get into this, and in terms of what kind of technology they can leverage?
So poultry farming is quite tricky. And as I said, if you go on Nourishing Africa, you'll find some reports on livestock farming. There's a good one that was done last year, and it includes poultry. And why poultry is tricky is because of disease. It's very easy for all your birds to die if they're not well cared for. So you need dry land, and you need to make sure that it's very secure, and you have to protect your birds. That's the first thing. The second thing is poultry is very large, so you can enter into just day-old chicks. That alone is a business, or into layers, or into egg production. So you have to figure out where in the poultry value chain you can add most value, or just producing feed or medicine. I wouldn't suggest that you start off with every aspect of the value chain. You can pick one entry point and then build on it. And then the final thing I'll say about poultry is that there's a capacity utilization rate. It's almost like running a hotel, because you're providing 24-hour ventilation and support for these birds. If you're doing day-old chicks, or if you're doing broilers. And if you don't have enough of them, the cost is way too high. And if you need to have at least 80% capacity utilization to make money in poultry. And if you do, some people make up to 40% margins. But that's why you hear people saying, I have 100,000 birds, or I have 200,000 birds, because you need to get up to a certain amount of birds, number of birds, to be able to make money. The economies of scale are really critical in poultry, which is not the same in piggery, for example. You don't need economies of scale to raise pigs, or in aquaculture as much as in poultry, but they're still affected by the same disease issues, very, very sensitive to disease. And so that's a huge, huge challenge right now in many of our poultry sectors. We've had companies have entire birds wiped out by the disease that we had 2 years ago. So just think about how to manage a lot of that, and what aspects of the value chain you want to enter into.
Sounds tricky indeed. There's a interesting question here. What can you say on the factors that are causing continuous increase in the prices of agri products, despite improved competition in the sector? How can startups survive in this competitive landscape?
I would say that the main reason we have such I think it's bad behavior, really, because of the asymmetry of information. If information is not widely available, people don't know how to make decisions, and they get fooled. And that's why I start off with data as a big need. For example, people are telling us right now that, there are eggs that are rotting in different parts of Nigeria because they can't get to Lagos. And in Lagos, we're paying 1,200 to 1,400 for a crate of eggs. And that information asymmetry doesn't help, both from the farmer and that's why in many countries in Ethiopia, what they have is a commodity exchange, so that pricing information is available to everybody, so we can see the daily prices from the farm to the fork. So I think it's very important to address the information asymmetry. The second is that we need more collaboration in our sectors, across value chains and within value chains, so that you can understand where the bottlenecks are and who is causing the bottleneck, who is causing it at the price gouging, who is causing unfair competition, whatever the case may be. And our value chains are very fragmented. The Cassava Growers Association has very little to do with the Cassava Seed Farmers Association, and they don't do much with the Cassava Processors Association, and yet we're all in the cassava value chain. And so that's a break in communication, creates challenges. This is a very long chain. Some of our sectors have extremely long value chains, and it's important to unite and to collaborate and to share information so that we can remove some of these bottlenecks. Because at the end of the day, the person who suffers is the Nigerian consumer. Nigerian households spend about 56% of their income on food, according to the World Economic Forum, one of the highest in the world. You can say it's because we have low purchasing power and we have low incomes, but Indians spend 30% of their household income on food. Americans between 6 to 7% of their household income on food, primarily because food is cheap. Food is expensive in Nigeria relative to what we earn. But even on an absolute basis, food is still expensive. When I think about how much I can spend when I go abroad for the same things that I buy here, I often bring food back to Nigeria because food is expensive. And so the challenge is, what can we do to make food more cost effective so that the average Nigerian can have 3 square meals a day and have access to nutritious food? And that takes collaboration, information sharing, and partnerships, and then a government that creates an enabling environment for the sector.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I like this question here. It's from a lecturer in a Nigerian university, and he says that we have many students that don't believe in the future of agriculture. Funding has been difficult, and there's a situation where it's difficult to train students in merchandising, in mechanized farming, and it has not helped the situation. How can we improve the interest of youth in agriculture at the level of university training?
Yeah, so I was saying earlier that we had just today a Sahel Scholars Conference, and so I would encourage the professor to please go online and see the recording of that conference. And the reason we had it is primarily what you said. When we started going to universities, because I told you talent is such a problem, and we found that most students, it was their 5th choice. They applied for medicine, they couldn't get it. They tried pharmacy, they couldn't get it. Microbiology, they couldn't get it. Agriculture was like, please, my uncle, help me get into university. And that's how I ended up studying agriculture. Meanwhile, it's the most important sector in our country. And the irony of it all is that most of these students want to get out of the sector because they think they're never going to make money. So the first thing is that we have to change the way we teach. And that's one of the things I've realized. We have to change the way we teach. So we had on the faculty session we had this afternoon, a professor from Africa Leadership University who used to teach at Harvard Business School, Catherine Duggan. And she gave a very powerful presentation telling professors we need to start using case studies, the case study method. We need to have internships for our students. We need to bring entrepreneurs to classroom, make this practical. Let them see agriculture not as a science, but as a business. If you change their mindsets and expose them to people who are doing it, they'll get excited about the sector. And we've proven that that's possible. Sahel has an internship program. We give scholarships to students because we're trying to get the best and the brightest students excited about this industry. Because my growth is linked to my ability to find young people who can drive the business. So for me, Professor, I think you also have a challenge on your hand. I would love for you to use my book when it comes out as the curriculum in your classes. That's one of the reasons why I'm writing this book, because by encouraging students and making it fun for them. And guess what? What COVID-19 has shown us is that we don't need to be in a classroom to teach. So you can have me speak to your students using digital technology. You can have anyone in the world. Catherine Duggan, who spoke to professors today, was sitting in New York City. You can leverage technology to bring the best and brightest minds to teach your students. And I'm sure that's what your university does, is leveraging technology. So I think we have a lot to do to change mindsets, but we also have to make this sector attractive. And there are people making money in agriculture. And our young people should understand that they can do so much in this sector. It's wide open for us. Olam started in Nigeria in 1989. Today it's operating in close to 50 countries. And it's traded on the Singapore Stock Exchange. And they export sesame from Nigeria. They export ginger and cocoa from Nigeria. They also import a lot of things into Nigeria. But following their progress just gives me a lot of hope that we have not just scratched the surface of the opportunities in our sector.
Okay, we'll take just the last couple of questions here to be respectful of time. There's one here that asks if you would share some simple steps on how to have a social business venture in agri-foods, business development and expansion. So if you want to go into it for social impact.
Yeah, so I've written a book, as I mentioned, called Social Innovation in Africa, a practical guide for scaling impact. And I'd encourage you to get a copy. In Nigeria, it's called Reaching Millions with Impact. And if you're in Lagos, you can get it at our office, but you can also buy it on Amazon. And the reason I'm encouraging you is because it walks you through the steps of how to actually package your idea and test it, and also ensure that you can raise funding. But just to summarize really quickly, you need to make sure that it's demand driven, it's solving a problem, and that you embed scaling into your DNA from day one. I could give a whole new lecture about how to build a social enterprise. So it's a bit tough to respond, and I think we just have 1 more minute. So I'd encourage you to please check out the book, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
And Ndidi, if you don't mind, we have a couple of questions asking about the value chain. And I know this is a very broad question. So if we can just touch on it just really quickly on, fast track value chain of agriculture. If we could also touch on the storage aspect of it real quick before we round up.
So there's so many value chains, so many. I mean, I could take each value chain. We could talk about tomato for the next 1 hour. We could talk about cassava and yam. Yam is such an interesting one. We do a lot of work in yam. And yam is interesting because it's such a profitable value chain and very neglected. And right now, I just bought a tuber of yam yesterday for 1,800 naira. When it's in season, it's 100 naira. So imagine the difference between 100 naira and 1,800. That just shows you how it's so important to build storage systems for yam, but also processing of yam. So, my dear, there's so much we can talk about on each value chain, but what I'd encourage you to do, please, is go on sahelconsult.com and just go on research, and you'll see all the free research we have available to you. Download it. It's practical. It's from the Nigerian environment. The same with nourishingafrica.com. We've started something on Nourishing Africa called Ask the Expert. So every week we have a leading expert, global expert in agriculture, and you can ask them any question and they'll respond. And your question will be on the website. So please go and ask an expert. I think we're closing the Ask an Expert for this week. But every week, next week is on financing. So you can have a lot of people answering questions that you need. So we've created this support just because we know so many people need information. And please leverage these resources. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure connecting with all of you. And I hope some of you are convinced to enter the ag sector and to thrive and grow.
Thank you, Ndidi. And lastly, we have a lot of people asking about how to stay in contact with you and your businesses, about the books that you've written. If they want more, maybe if you can refer us to your LinkedIn pages or your websites or whatnot.
So you can follow me on Instagram. I don't know, I'll put in the chat. My Ndidi.Nwuneli on LinkedIn, Twitter. If you follow, and then my email for Sahel is nwuneli@sahelcp.com. So Ndidi Nwuneli for Instagram, and Twitter is Ndidi.Nwuneli. So please, to you to go on nourishingafrica.com. We created this free portal just to share information with young Nigerians and young Africans, and I'd really like you to take advantage of it. And the faculty member, please stay in touch as well. It's been a pleasure connecting with all of you. As I mentioned, there are lots of resources on our website, so please visit sahelconsults.com.
All right, thank you so much, Ndidi, and we appreciate you borrowing us 3 extra minutes of your time. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.